The dining room of Le Ciel glittered under crystal chandeliers, casting warm light across tables draped in spotless white linen. Soft conversations and the gentle clink of silverware filled the air as May moved between tables with practiced grace. Her steps were quick but silent on the plush carpet as she balanced a heavy tray of champagne flutes, the bubbles rising in perfect columns through the golden liquid. "More champagne, madam?" she asked with a slight bow, her voice quiet and polite. The woman barely glanced up, merely lifting her empty glass without pausing her conversation about her recent yacht purchase. May refilled it with a steady hand, her presence almost invisible to the guests who paid hundreds of dollars for their meals but rarely noticed the people who served them. At 26, May had been working double shifts at Le Ciel for 3 years now. By day, she attended classes at the city's prestigious music conservatory, stretching her partial scholarship as far as possible. By night, she served the city's elite, watching life unfold from the shadows while collecting tips that would help pay next month's rent. Tonight was different from the usual dinner service. Le Ciel was hosting the annual charity gala for the Symphony Foundation, and the restaurant buzzed with excitement. Women draped in silk and diamonds mingled with men in tailored tuxedos. Among them were composers whose music May had studied, conductors whose performances she had watched from the cheapest seats, and wealthy patrons whose donations kept the arts alive in the city. As she served the appetizer course to a table of board members, May's ears perked up at their conversation. "It's a disaster," said an older gentleman with silver hair and bushy eyebrows. "How can we have a Symphony Foundation gala without music?" A woman with a pearl necklace worth more than May's yearly tuition nodded gravely. "Poor Thomas. Food poisoning of all things. But couldn't we find another pianist on such short notice?" "On a Saturday night? Everyone worth having is already booked," replied a third board member, shaking his head. "We'll just have to make do with speeches and checkbooks instead." May's heart began to beat faster as she set down the last plate and slipped away from the table. Her eyes drifted to the grand piano in the corner of the dining room. The beautiful Steinway was usually just an elegant decoration, something for guests to admire as they sipped their after-dinner drinks. But May knew its voice intimately. For months she had been staying after closing time when the restaurant was empty and dark. The night manager, an older woman named Rose who had taken a liking to May, pretended not to notice when she lingered after her shift. In those quiet hours after midnight, May would sit at the piano and play, softly at first, then with growing confidence as the weeks passed. The music that filled the empty restaurant during those stolen moments was her true voice, the one she couldn't share with the world yet. No one at Le Ciel knew that May had been accepted to the conservatory on a rare partial scholarship, one reserved for students with exceptional talent. They didn't know she had started playing at 5 on a second-hand upright piano her parents had sacrificed to buy, or that before their small family restaurant had failed, she had been preparing for international competitions. Life had taken unexpected turns, but her fingers had never forgotten the feeling of the keys beneath them. As she returned to the kitchen, pushing through the swinging doors, the controlled chaos of the restaurant's heart enveloped her. Chefs called out orders. Line cooks moved in a coordinated dance, and servers rushed in and out with plates of artfully arranged food. "Table 7 needs more bread," called out Kai, another server who had started around the same time as May. He gave her a quick smile as he loaded his tray with entrees. "How's the fancy crowd tonight? Anyone famous?" "The usual," May replied, filling a breadbasket. "But the Symphony Foundation's pianist canceled. Food poisoning. Bet they wish you could step in," Kai said with a wink. He was one of the few people at the restaurant who knew about May's studies. "Show them what they're missing while they ignore you." May laughed softly, but something stirred inside her. A crazy idea began to form, one that made her palms sweat and her heart race. What if she did offer to play? The thought was terrifying. These weren't just random diners, they were experts, critics, the very people who could make or break a musician's career. And she was just a waitress to them, someone in the background of their evening. Mr. Reynolds, the floor manager, appeared beside her, his perpetual frown deepening the lines on his forehead. "Jen, table 12 has been waiting for their check for 5 minutes. And when you're done, the event coordinator is having a meltdown about the missing pianist. Go see if you can help with anything else they need." "Yes, sir," May answered automatically, filing away the information. She delivered the check to table 12, collected payment from table 9 and refilled water glasses for a foretop by the window. All the while, the piano in the corner seemed to watch her, pulling at her like a magnet. The event coordinator, a thin woman with a sleek bob and a clipboard, was indeed having what looked like a carefully controlled breakdown near the entrance to the private dining section. Her whispered conversation with Mr. Reynolds grew more intense as the main course was served, and the time for the planned musical interlude approached. May overheard fragments as she passed. The director is furious. Reputation of the foundation, donors expecting culture, not just another rubber chicken dinner. By the time dessert was being served, a tense atmosphere had settled over the gala. The foundation's director, a tall woman with striking white hair cut in a severe bob, stood to make an announcement. Her voice, trained through years of fundraising speeches, carried easily through the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we regret that our planned musical entertainment will not be possible this evening. Our pianist, Thomas Weber, sends his sincere apologies. We will proceed directly to our fundraising appeal after dessert. Disappointed murmurs rippled through the crowd. May felt something twist inside her chest. How many times had she dreamed of playing for people who truly appreciated music? How many nights had she practiced until her fingers ached, hoping for a chance that never seemed to come? She looked around at the room full of people who could open doors with a single phone call, who could fund scholarships or arrange auditions, people who would never see her unless she made them look. Before she could talk herself out of it, May set down her serving tray and walked directly to Mr. Reynolds. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I can play." He looked down at her with confusion as if she had started speaking a foreign language. "What are you talking about, Chen?" "The piano," she clarified, nodding toward the Steinway. "I can play for the gala." His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "This isn't the time for jokes. Get back to your section." "I'm serious," May persisted, fighting to keep her voice professional. "I'm in my final year at the conservatory. I study piano performance. I know classical repertoire, Bach, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. I can play whatever they need." Mr. Reynolds stared at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time since she'd been hired. His eyes narrowed. "The conservatory? Why haven't you ever mentioned this?" "You never asked," she replied simply, and it didn't seem relevant to carrying trays. The event coordinator had overheard their conversation and approached with obvious skepticism. "You're saying you can perform concert piano? At performance level?" May nodded. "Yes, I've been studying for years." The coordinator and Mr. Reynolds exchanged glances, weighing the risk against the awkward musical void in their elegant evening. "If I embarrass the restaurant, you can fire me," May offered, knowing exactly how much she was putting on the line. Her job at Le Ciel barely covered her rent and expenses, but it was the only position she'd found that allowed her the flexibility to attend classes. After a painfully long moment, Mr. Reynolds gave a curt nod. "One piece, something appropriate and not too ambitious. If it goes well, we'll see about more." The coordinator quickly pulled the foundation director aside, explaining the situation in hurried whispers. The director's piercing gaze found May, assessing the young woman in her server's uniform with obvious doubt. Finally, she gave a resigned nod. "It seems we have no better options. Young lady, are you familiar with any Chopin? Perhaps a nocturne?" "Yes, ma'am," May replied, feeling a rush of both terror and exhilaration. "Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. That would be suitable," the director agreed, her tone suggesting she was keeping her expectations very low. May took a deep breath as she walked across the dining room, feeling the weight of dozens of curious and skeptical gazes. The server stopped to watch. The kitchen staff peered through the service doors. Conversations quieted as this unexpected turn of events unfolded. The path to the piano felt a mile long. May was acutely aware of her practical black shoes, her simple uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat bun for work rather than styled for performance. But as she approached the magnificent instrument, none of that mattered anymore. She sat on the bench, adjusting it with the familiarity of someone who belongs there. Her hands hovered over the keys for just a moment as she closed her eyes and took a steadying breath. This was her chance, perhaps the only one she would get. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne floated into the air like whispers. May's fingers touched the keys with a gentleness that belied her nerves. The melody rose and fell, delicate and dreamy, filling the elegant dining room with a sound that made time stand still. At first, few people paid attention. Conversations continued, though slightly quieter as the unexpected music registered in the background of their awareness. May kept her eyes on her hands, focusing on each note, each phrase, letting the familiar piece calm her racing heart. By the middle section, heads began to turn. The beautiful melody, played with surprising sensitivity, drew gazes toward the corner where the waitress sat at the piano. The gentle runs and ornaments flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. She didn't play like someone filling in at the last minute. She played like someone who had lived with this music in her bones for years. Conversations gradually died away. Forks paused midway to mouths. The room grew quieter with each measure as the unlikely performer commanded attention without demanding it. When the final notes faded, leaving a moment of perfect silence, May opened her eyes. She hadn't realized she'd closed them. The room remained hushed, dozens of surprised faces staring at her as if seeing a stranger. Then the applause began. Scattered at first, then growing until the entire room filled with it. May felt her cheeks flush as she stood and gave a small, awkward bow, unused to receiving recognition in this space where she usually moved invisibly. The foundation director approached the piano, her stern expression now curious. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice carrying in the room. "What else can you play?" May's throat felt dry. "Bach, Beethoven, Liszt, Rachmaninoff," she replied, naming composers whose works had kept her company through lonely nights and early mornings. "Rachmaninoff?" The director raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "That's quite ambitious." A man rose from his table near the front of the room. He was older, with a full head of silver hair and intense eyes that seemed to look through May rather than at her. She recognized him immediately. Conductor Lin, whose interpretations of the great symphonic works had inspired her since childhood. "Let her play," he said, his deep voice carrying authority that silenced the room again. "I'd like to hear what she can do." May felt her hands trembling slightly. Playing Chopin for a charity dinner was one thing. Playing for Conductor Lin was entirely another. Mr. Reynolds appeared at her side. "Chen," he whispered urgently, "don't embarrass us. If the maestro wants to hear you, you'd better be good." She nodded once, then turned back to the piano. Her mind raced through her repertoire, searching for the right piece, something that would show her abilities without seeming pretentious, something that spoke to who she was as a musician. Her hands found the keys, and the thunderous opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the room. The piece was meant for piano and orchestra, but May played both parts, her left hand providing the orchestral foundation while her right hand carried the solo line. The technical challenges were enormous, but she had played this piece 100 times, loving its emotional journey from darkness to triumph. As she played, something magical happened. The dining room of Le Ciel, with its wealthy patrons and fine china, disappeared. The server's uniform she wore faded from her awareness. There was only the music, passionate, yearning, powerful, and her hands bringing it to life. The first movement built to its climax, and May threw herself into it completely, her body moving with the music, her face reflecting every emotional shift. This was who she truly was, not the quiet figure who refilled water glasses and removed empty plates. This was her voice speaking clearly for the first time in this room where she had been silent for 3 years. When the movement ended, she didn't stop. She flowed directly into the second movement, its famous opening melody singing with such longing that several listeners felt tears spring unexpectedly to their eyes. The romantic theme developed and built, carried by May's sensitive touch and masterful dynamics. In the kitchen, work had come to a standstill. Chefs and dishwashers stood in the doorway, watching their colleague transform before their eyes. Kai grinned widely, giving a thumbs up when May glanced his way during a brief pause. "Did you know she could do this?" one of the line cooks whispered to him. "I knew she was good," Kai replied, shaking his head in amazement. "But not like this. Not this good." As May played the final movement, her confidence grew. Her back straightened, her chin lifted, and she played with the assurance of someone who belonged on concert stages. The challenging passages, runs that spanned the keyboard, complex rhythms, moments that required both power and delicacy, flowed from her fingers without hesitation. When the final chords resounded through the room, there was a beat of stunned silence. Then the room erupted. People rose to their feet, applauding and cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others looked at each other in disbelief. Conductor Lin approached the piano, his expression inscrutable. May stood, her legs shaky, and bowed deeply to him. "Who are you?" he asked simply. "My name is May Chen," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm a student at the conservatory. Who is your teacher?" "Professor Wang," she said, naming a respected but not famous faculty member who took on scholarship students. The conductor nodded thoughtfully. "And you work here full-time?" "Yes, sir. Double shifts most days. I have a partial scholarship, but living expenses in this city." She trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was making excuses. "Play something else," he said, but it wasn't a request. It was a test. May sat again, considering carefully. She chose a listitude, one that showcased technical brilliance. Her fingers flew across the keys in dazzling patterns, drawing gasps from the audience. When she finished, she moved directly into a Bach prelude, demonstrating her range and versatility. By now, the entire staff of Le Ciel had found reasons to enter the dining room. They stood along the walls, watching their colleague with newfound respect and amazement. Mr. Reynolds, the floor manager who had barely noticed May for 3 years, stood with his mouth slightly open, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the quiet server. The foundation director conferred quietly with board members. Their heads bent close together as they glanced repeatedly at May. Conductor Lin had taken a seat near the piano, watching her hands with professional interest. After nearly 40 minutes of continuous playing, May finally stopped, her face flushed and a light sheen of perspiration on her forehead. The room once again filled with applause, this time accompanied by calls of bravo and encore. The foundation director approached the piano again, this time with a genuine smile. "Ms. Chen, you've saved our evening in the most extraordinary way. Would you be willing to continue playing for the remainder of our event? We would, of course, compensate you appropriately." May glanced at Mr. Reynolds, who nodded vigorously, his earlier skepticism replaced with something like pride. "I'd be honored," she replied. A woman in a deep blue evening gown approached the piano. Her silver jewelry caught the light, and her bearing marked her as someone of importance even before she spoke. "I'm Vivian Winters, chairwoman of the foundation," she said, extending a hand to May. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, though you've been serving my table all evening." May wiped her hands nervously on her black pants before shaking the offered hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Mrs. Winters." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Vivian replied. She glanced around at the buzzing room, then leaned closer to May. "You've caused quite a stir. Conductor Lin doesn't impress easily, and I've never seen him so intrigued by an unknown pianist." Before May could respond, Vivian continued, "Tell me, why haven't we heard of you before? A talent like yours doesn't usually remain hidden." May's smile turned slightly sad. "Life doesn't always go as planned, Mrs. Winters. My family had financial troubles when I was in high school. My competition plans had to be set aside. I'm grateful for my partial scholarship, but talent shouldn't be hindered by finances," Vivian finished for her, a determined look crossing her face. "We'll discuss this further. For now, would you play something festive? Our guests are in quite a celebratory mood thanks to you." As May turned back to the keyboard, she caught sight of Kai giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up from across the room. The other servers were smiling at her, some taking photos with their phones. The kitchen staff peered through the doorway, the head chef nodding with approval. For the first time in 3 years, May felt truly seen in this room. As her fingers found the keys again, she realized that tonight everything had changed. The path ahead was suddenly full of possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine just hours earlier. She began to play, and the music soared. For the next hour, May played piece after piece, her fingers dancing across the keys with growing confidence. She chose music that matched the mood of the room, sometimes lively and bright, sometimes soft and thoughtful. The guests, who had come expecting a formal charity dinner, found themselves at an impromptu concert instead, delivered by the young woman who had earlier served their appetizers. Between pieces, people approached the piano to introduce themselves. Music professors, orchestra board members, and wealthy patrons who funded scholarships handed her their business cards. May tucked each one carefully into her pocket, hardly believing what was happening. "You must audition for the Young Artists competition next month," said one elderly gentleman, who introduced himself as a retired concert pianist. "The winner performs with the symphony and receives a substantial prize." I hadn't planned to enter this year," May stammered, thinking of her work schedule and practice limitations. "Nonsense," he replied kindly. "After what I've heard tonight, you must. I'd be happy to sponsor your application fee." Before she could properly thank him, he was replaced by others wanting to meet the evening's surprise star. May's head swam with names and faces and offers of support she'd never expected. During a short break when May paused to rest her hands, Mr. Reynolds approached with a glass of water. "Chen," he said, his usual brisk tone softened with something like respect. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" May took a grateful sip of water before answering. "Would it have mattered, sir? I needed the job. I still do." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Well, after tonight, I think we might be able to adjust your schedule. Perhaps fewer lunch shifts? Give you more practice time?" "That would be amazing," she replied, genuinely touched by the offer. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in Le Ciel transformed. The strict formality of the charity gala gave way to a warmer, more genuine celebration. Guests lingered at their tables, reluctant to leave while May continued to play. The waitstaff, usually invisible to the patrons, received smiles and questions about their talented colleague. "Did you know she could play like that? Has she worked here long? Is she always so quiet?" Kai fielded these questions with pride, as if he'd personally discovered May's talent. "She's the hardest worker here," he told one impressed patron. "First to arrive, last to leave. And she never complains, even when people treat her like she's furniture." The patron had the good sense to look chagrined. Near midnight, as the event finally began to wind down, conductor Lin approached the piano again. He had been watching May all evening, his keen eyes missing nothing about her technique or musicality. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of musical authority. "May I have a word with you?" May nodded, suddenly nervous again. She followed him to a quiet corner, aware that many eyes followed their movement. "You have exceptional talent," he said without preamble. "Raw in places, but the foundation is remarkable. Your interpretation of Rachmaninoff showed both technical skill and emotional maturity beyond your years. Thank you." "Sir?" May replied, her heart racing at praise from such a respected figure. "However," he continued, "there are issues in your left-hand technique during complex passages, and your pedaling in Bach was occasionally heavy-handed." May didn't flinch from the criticism. She'd spent enough years studying music to know that honest feedback was more valuable than empty praise. "You're absolutely right," she said. "I've been working on those issues, but practice time is limited." The conductor's eyes softened slightly. "Yes, I understand your situation is challenging. That makes what you've accomplished all the more impressive." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small card. "Come see me at the Symphony Hall next Tuesday at 10. We'll discuss your future." May took the card with slightly trembling fingers. "My future?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because you clearly have one in music. Ms. Chen tonight proved that." As he walked away, May stood frozen, the small card in her hand feeling impossibly heavy with potential. The gala officially ended around midnight, though several guests lingered, reluctant to break the spell of the evening. As the last patrons finally departed, the staff of Le Ciel gathered around the piano, no longer separated by the invisible wall between those who serve and those who are served. "That was incredible," said the head chef, who had come out of the kitchen to congratulate her. 3 years you've worked here, and we had no idea we had a concert pianist among us." "I'm not a concert pianist," May corrected gently. "Just a student who loves music." "Not anymore," said Kai with a grin. "Did I see Conductor Lin give you his card?" "The man's a legend," May nodded, still unable to fully process everything that had happened. "He wants me to come to the Symphony Hall on Tuesday." A cheer went up from her colleagues. Even the stern Mr. Reynolds smiled broadly. "First round is on me," announced Rose, the night manager who had always turned a blind eye to May's after-hours practice sessions. "Let's go celebrate our star." But May hesitated, thinking of her early class the next day and the stack of music theory homework waiting in her tiny apartment. "I should probably—" "Oh no," Kai interrupted, gently taking her arm. "Tonight you celebrate. Tomorrow you can go back to being responsible May who never has any fun. But tonight? Tonight you shone like the sun and we're going to celebrate that." Something in his words struck a chord. For years, May had put her head down and worked, focused only on surviving each day, each bill, each challenge. She'd forgotten how to celebrate moments of joy when they came. Okay, she agreed with a smile. One drink. The staff piled into a nearby bar that stayed open late, specifically catering to restaurant workers after their shifts. The regular patrons looked up in surprise as the usually sedate team from Le Ciel burst in with unusual energy, all talking at once about their colleagues' hidden talent. Drinks appeared, toasts were made, and for the first time since starting at the restaurant, May felt truly part of the team. The hierarchy that normally divided the kitchen staff from the floor staff dissolved as they shared stories and laughter. "So all those times you stayed late," Rose began. "I was practicing." "Yes," May admitted. "Thank you for never reporting me." Rose waved away her thanks. "I heard you playing once. It was so beautiful I couldn't bring myself to stop you. I just made sure the security cameras in that section were turned off during your sessions." May's eyes widened. "You knew all along?" "Some secrets are worth keeping," Rose replied with a wink. "But I'm glad the world knows now." As the celebration continued around her, May found a quiet moment to check her phone. There were already messages from classmates and her professor at the conservatory. Word had spread quickly through social media, with several guests posting about the Waitress pianist who had stunned the Symphony Foundation gala. One message made her pause. It was from her mother, who lived in a small town 3 hours away, working long hours at a factory to help support May's education after their family restaurant had failed. "Someone just sent me a video of you playing tonight." The message read, "Dad and I are so proud we can't stop crying. This is what we always dreamed for you. Your grandfather would have been so happy to see this day." Tears filled May's eyes as she thought of her grandfather, who had first placed her tiny hands on piano keys when she was just 4 years old. He had recognized something in her even then, a natural affinity for music that had shaped her life's path. Before he passed away, he had made her promise never to give up on music, no matter what obstacles life placed in her way. "I kept my promise." "Grandfather," she whispered to herself. Around her, her colleagues continued celebrating, their voices rising in cheerful conversation, unaware of the deeply personal moment she was experiencing. May wiped away her tears and rejoined the group, accepting their congratulations with grateful smiles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She still had bills to pay, classes to attend, and now a meeting with conductor Lynn that could change everything, or nothing at all. The future remained as uncertain as ever. But tonight, for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than limitation. Tonight she had been truly seen. Tonight her music had spoken for her. Tonight was indeed a night to treasure. Tuesday morning arrived with a mix of clouds and sunshine, much like May's own feelings as she stood outside the imposing glass doors of the Symphony Hall. She had passed this building hundreds of times, sometimes stopping to read the posters advertising performances she couldn't afford to attend. Now she was about to enter as someone with an appointment, not just a passerby. She checked her watch. 9:45. She was early, but that was better than late. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the revolving door into the grand lobby. The space echoed with her footsteps as she approached the reception desk where a gray-haired woman looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I have an appointment with conductor Lin at 10, May replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is May Chen." Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes. "Ah, the pianist from Le Ciel, we've been expecting you." She picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Maestro, Ms. Chen is here for her appointment." After listening for a moment, she hung up and smiled at May. "He'll see you now. Take the elevator to the 4th floor, then follow the signs to the administrative offices." May thanked her and walked to the elevator, clutching the small backpack that contained her music books and notes. The weekend had passed in a blur. Her Saturday night performance had somehow been recorded by several guests and shared widely on social media. By Sunday morning, her phone had been flooded with messages from classmates, professors, and even local news outlets wanting interviews. Le Ciel had received so many calls asking about the pianist Waitress that Mr. Reynolds had offered her a choice: continue as a server with a more flexible schedule, or consider a new position as the restaurant's weekend pianist. The salary he mentioned was nearly twice what she made as a server. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, revealing a hallway lined with framed photos of conductors and soloists who had performed with the symphony over the years. May walked slowly, recognizing many famous faces from her music history textbooks. At the end of the hallway, a door stood open. Conductor Lin was seated at a desk covered with scores, his silver hair catching the morning light from a large window behind him. He looked up as May appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Chen," he said, rising to greet her. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." May took the offered chair, setting her backpack carefully on the floor beside her. The office was smaller than she had imagined, but filled with music, scores piled on every surface, a small upright piano in one corner, and shelves lined with books about composers and musical theory. "I've been thinking about your performance on Saturday," the conductor began, studying her with those intense eyes that seemed to see everything. "It was remarkable, especially considering the circumstances." "Thank you," May replied, not knowing what else to say. "Tell me about your training," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your background." So May told him her story, about her grandfather who had first taught her to play on an old upright piano, about the teachers who had recognized her talent early, about the competitions she had won as a child. She told him about her family's restaurant failing during the economic downturn, about moving to a smaller apartment, about her parents taking second jobs to help support her dream. She explained how she had earned her partial scholarship to the conservatory, how she worked double shifts at Le Ciel to cover rent and expenses, how she practiced whenever and wherever she could, sometimes at school, sometimes at the restaurant after closing, sometimes on a paper keyboard she had drawn when she couldn't access a real piano. The conductor listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When May finished, he nodded slowly. "What you've accomplished despite these obstacles is extraordinary," he said, "but it also concerns me." "Concerns you?" May asked, puzzled. "Yes. Talent like yours shouldn't have to struggle so hard just for the opportunity to develop." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Our system fails too many promising musicians who don't have financial advantages." He turned back to her. "I'd like to help change your circumstances if you'll allow it." May felt her heart begin to race. "How?" "The symphony has an emerging artist program. It includes a stipend, mentorship, performance opportunities, and access to our practice facilities 24 hours a day." He returned to his desk and picked up a folder. "Normally, entry is through a competitive audition held once a year. The next one isn't scheduled until spring." May's hope dimmed slightly. Spring was months away and her financial situation was tight now. "However," the conductor continued, "as artistic director, I have the authority to offer one discretionary appointment per season." He slid the folder across the desk toward her. "I'd like to offer it to you." May stared at the folder, unable to fully process what was happening. "You mean now? Without an audition?" "Saturday night was your audition, Ms. Chen, and you passed with flying colors." His stern face softened into a smile. "Though I would like to hear you play in a proper setting, with a properly tuned concert grand before we finalize everything." He gestured toward the door. "Shall we? The main hall is empty this morning." In a daze, May followed him down the hallway to another elevator, this one leading backstage. They walked through the wings and suddenly emerged onto the main stage of Symphony Hall. The space was enormous, with row upon row of empty seats stretching up into the shadowy balconies. At center stage stood a magnificent grand piano, its lid raised and gleaming under the work lights. "Go ahead," Conductor Lin encouraged. "Feel the instrument. Take your time." May approached the piano with reverence. It was a Steinway concert grand, the finest instrument she had ever laid hands on. She sat on the bench, adjusting its height, then placed her fingers on the keys. The first chord she played resonated through the hall with a richness that made her close her eyes in pure joy. The action of the keys was perfect, responsive without being too light, allowing for precise control of dynamics and articulation. She began with Bach, a prelude that started simply but grew increasingly complex. The notes rang clear in the perfect acoustics of the hall. She then moved to Chopin, letting the romantic melodies soar into the empty space. Finally, she played part of the Rachmaninoff concerto that had so impressed the audience at Le Ciel. Throughout her playing, Conductor Lin stood silently, sometimes with his eyes closed, sometimes watching her hands or her face. When she finally stopped, the last note seemed to linger in the air. unwilling to fade completely away. "That settles it," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "You belong here, Ms. Chen." Back in his office, he explained the details of the program. The monthly stipend wasn't large, but it would cover her basic expenses without the need for restaurant work. She would have practice time on the concert grand whenever the hall wasn't being used for rehearsals or performances. Most importantly, she would receive coaching from him and other professionals, preparing her for competitions and auditions that could launch her career. "There's one more thing," he added, reaching into his desk drawer. "The foundation chairwoman, Mrs. Winters, was quite taken with your playing and your story. She's established a special scholarship in your name at the conservatory, one that will cover your remaining tuition and expenses." He handed her an envelope with the Symphony Foundation's letterhead. Inside was a letter detailing the scholarship and a personal note from Vivian Winters. "Your music touched us deeply. Now it's our turn to support your journey. The world needs to hear you play." Tears filled May's eyes as the full impact of these changes hit her. After years of struggling to balance work, school, and practice, after countless nights of exhaustion and worry about bills, after moments of doubt when she wondered if her dream was slipping away, suddenly, the path ahead had cleared. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," the conductor replied simply. "Say yes and then get to work. Real work, without distraction or exhaustion. The kind of work your talent deserves." May nodded, wiping away tears. "Yes, thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't." He stood, signaling that their meeting was concluding. "Report here tomorrow at 9. We'll set up your schedule and access credentials. And Miss Chen, yes? Bring music you'd like to perform with the orchestra. In the spring concert series, you'll be our featured soloist." As May left the symphony hall, stepping into the midday sunshine, the world looked different. The same streets, the same buildings, the same city. But everything had changed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kai. "How did it go?" "Tell me everything," she smiled, typing back. "It went well. Actually, better than well. My life just changed completely." Before heading to her afternoon class at the conservatory, May made a detour to a small park. She sat on a bench and called her parents. When her mother answered, May couldn't hold back her emotions. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Remember how grandfather always said music would open doors for me one day? He was right." 3 months passed in a whirlwind of change for May. Her days, once divided between classes and exhausting shifts at the restaurant, now centered entirely on music. She practiced 6 hours daily in the symphony's rehearsal rooms, worked with vocal soloists and instrumentalists as an accompanist, and received weekly coaching from conductor Lin himself. The conductor was demanding but fair. He pushed May beyond what she thought possible, challenging her interpretation of pieces she had played for years, refining her technique until her hands ached, and assigning new works that stretched her abilities. "Again," he would say after she played through a difficult passage, "but this time think about what the composer was feeling. Let the music breathe." Sometimes his instructions seemed impossible. How could she make a piano, an instrument of hammers and strings, sound like a human voice singing with emotion? But she tried again and again until something shifted in her playing. Notes became phrases, phrases became stories, and the music came alive under her fingers in ways she hadn't known were possible. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and posters throughout the city announcing the symphony's season finale. Introducing May Chen, piano soloist. Her photo appeared beside conductor Lin's on the symphony's website and in the local newspaper's arts section. The Waitress pianist's story had captured public interest, and the concert sold out weeks in advance. The night before her debut, May returned to Le Ciel for the first time since leaving her job. Mr. Reynolds had insisted on hosting a private pre-concert dinner for her and her parents, who had arrived that afternoon from their small town. The restaurant looked the same: elegant tables, crystal chandeliers, white-gloved servers moving efficiently through the dining room. But May saw it differently now. This place that had once been just a workplace had become a turning point in her life story. Kai spotted her first, rushing over to wrap her in a warm hug. "Look at you. No more server's uniform. You're practically famous now." May laughed, returning the hug. "Hardly famous, but things have definitely changed. We've been following all the news," Rose said, joining them. "Your poster is hanging in the break room. We're all coming to the concert tomorrow night." Mr. Reynolds approached with uncharacteristic warmth. "Your table is ready, Ms. Chen. Your parents are already seated." He led her to a corner table where her mother and father waited. Her mother's eyes shone with pride as May sat down. Her father, usually quiet and reserved, reached across the table to take her hand. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he said softly. Dinner was a joyous reunion. The kitchen staff had prepared special dishes not on the regular menu, and servers who had once been May's colleagues stopped by to wish her luck. Even the wealthy regular patrons who recognized her from that fateful night offered congratulations and said they had tickets for tomorrow's performance. As dessert was served, Mr. Reynolds tapped his glass for attention. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said. "After Ms. Chen's remarkable performance here, we decided that Le Ciel should feature live piano music regularly. We've hired a pianist for weekday evenings, but our Saturday night spot remains open." He looked directly at May. "We'd be honored if you would consider playing here once a month whenever your new schedule permits. As our featured artist, not staff." May felt a rush of emotion. This restaurant had been just a job, sometimes a difficult one, but now they were offering her a connection to her past while honoring her future. "I'd love to," she replied sincerely. Later, walking her parents back to their hotel, her mother asked, "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" May considered the question carefully. "Yes," she admitted, "but not in the way I expected. I'm not afraid of making mistakes anymore. I'm just hoping to do justice to the music." Her father nodded with understanding. "That's how you know you're ready." The next day passed in a blur of last-minute practice and preparation. Before she knew it, May was backstage at Symphony Hall, wearing a floor-length gown of deep blue silk, a gift from Vivian Winters, who had become something of a mentor over the past months. 5 minutes. "Miss Chen," called the stage manager. May closed her eyes, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. From her grandfather's old upright piano to her parents' struggling restaurant, from scholarship student to overworked waitress, from an impromptu performance to this moment, about to step onto one of the most prestigious stages in the city. She thought of all the people who had helped her along the way. Her parents who sacrificed for her education, Professor Wang who saw her potential at the conservatory, Rose who allowed her after-hours practice at Le Ciel, Conductor Lin who gave her this chance, and even Kai who had always believed in her talent. The stage manager appeared again. "It's time." May walked onto the brightly lit stage, the sound of applause washing over her like a wave. The concert hall was filled to capacity, every seat taken from the orchestra level to the highest balcony. She spotted her parents in the 5th row, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The staff of Le Ciel occupied a whole section to the right, with Kai giving an enthusiastic thumbs up when their eyes met. She bowed to the audience, then to Conductor Lin who had entered behind her. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands in the traditional sign of respect for a soloist. As she took her place at the gleaming concert grand piano, a strange calm settled over her. This was where she belonged. Not hidden in the kitchen practicing after hours, not serving others while keeping her talent concealed, but here, sharing her music openly with those who wanted to listen. Conductor Lin raised his baton, and the orchestra began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece she had played that night at Le Ciel. When her entrance came, May's fingers found the keys with confidence and passion. The music flowed through her, each note clear and purposeful. This time she wasn't playing alone, trying to suggest the orchestra's parts. This time 70 musicians surrounded her, supporting her solo line, creating something larger and more beautiful than any one performer could achieve alone. As the first movement built to its climax, May felt a sense of joy unlike anything she'd known before. This was why her grandfather had placed his weathered hands over her tiny ones all those years ago, teaching her simple melodies. This was why her parents had worked extra jobs to pay for lessons. This was why she had kept practicing, even when her dreams seemed impossible. The audience listened in rapt silence, drawn into the emotional journey of the music. When the final triumphant chords of the third movement resounded through the hall, there was a moment of breathless quiet before the audience erupted in applause and cheers. They rose to their feet as May stood and bowed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Conductor Lin extended his hand to her, his usual stern expression replaced with genuine warmth. "Magnificent," he said, loud enough for only her to hear over the continuing applause. May bowed again to the orchestra, acknowledging their artistry and support. As she faced the audience once more, she saw many moving scenes, her mother wiping away tears, her father standing tall with pride, the Luciel staff cheering wildly, Vivian Winters nodding with satisfaction, and hundreds of strangers deeply moved by the music they had shared. For her encore, May chose a piece her grandfather had taught her, a simple, heartfelt melody that had been her first introduction to the beauty of the piano. As she played the familiar notes, she felt his presence somehow, guiding her hands as he had done years ago. Later that night, after the reception and congratulations, after hugging her parents goodnight, May returned alone to the empty concert hall. The cleaning staff let her in with knowing smiles, then left her in privacy. She walked onto the darkened stage lit only by a single work light, and sat at the piano that had been her partner in the evening's journey. Placing her hands gently on the keys, she played a quiet melody, just for herself. The sound drifted into the empty space, filling the darkness with beauty. This was the beginning of her new life, but she would never forget the path that had led her here. The struggles, the hard work, the moment of courage when she had stood up and said, "I can play." From waitress to soloist, from background to spotlight, from dreaming to doing, her journey had not been easy or direct. But sitting alone in the concert hall that now felt like home, May knew that every step had been necessary, every challenge worthwhile. The final note hung in the air, a promise of music yet to come.